Hawthorn's three-peat dynasty did something that no other dynasty had done before, and that was utilise in a big way recruiting from other clubs. North Melbourne in the 90s had their God squad of under-19s. West Coast and Brisbane were effectively, if you want to count West Coast and North as dynasties, if you don't, just ignore this bit. But Brisbane were effectively a state side from the Brisbane Bears after the merging with Fitzroy. And Geelong, through that 07-9-11 period, basically just had Brad Ottens, Cam Mooney and Tom Harley come from other clubs. Whereas throughout the three premiership years for the Hawks, we averaged 6 players from other clubs. And as this 2026 group have about a dozen guys from other clubs, I thought it would be fun to reflect on the big 6 trades that Hawthorn did as free agency was coming into the competition, and not only reflect on what we gave up, but how many of those deals ended up really good for the other clubs as well. And we're going to do this looking at trades at 3 levels: the rounds of the picks we gave up, what the actual numbers and players were, and then what the clubs did with them. Because at least when we were fleecing other teams, they still did well out of it, right? Right? So let's start with Josh Gibson. Fun fact, I've cooked for Gibbo 3 times in my life. 2 of them just in restaurants, 1 of them at a private function. And all I can say is in our interactions, he has been absolutely lovely. So, massive tick for Gibbo, who, along with Corey Enright, were the first players in the 2000s era to win premierships and multiple bests and fairests, if you don't mind, Pyatt. Now, granted, we didn't have the Brownlow winners like Brisbane did with Ackermanis and Black throughout, and of course, Voss had won one in 96, but this isn't about Brisbane, so stuff them. Gibbo was one of my absolute favourites. He was kind of a taller medium forward and was kind of a small tall forward, but he mastered the art of being the third man up in marking contests. Now, granted, if you only watched the Kennett Curse games, you'd only think that Gibbo used to get pretty much bitched by Tom Hawkins and James Podsiadly for a little bit there, but once he developed into his third man up role, he was one of the most unstoppable defenders in the league. When you think of like team of the centuries or team of the decades throughout the entire AFL competition, sure, you've got your more traditional key defenders like Scarlett, Rance, Fletcher, McGovern, Wiedering, Taylor, Andrews, amongst others. Throughout this time, Gibbo was your back pocket hybrid guy, is borderline a lock for me. But in a day or in an age where social media wasn't quite as crazy as what it is these days, I have a feeling that Hawthorn fans would have looked at how Gibbo had played on Bud early on in his days at North and wonder why the heck we got this scrub in. No offense, Gibbo, but let's be honest, Bud destroyed a lot of players in his career. Gibbo wasn't the only one. If you can't beat him, join him, and then Bud left anyway. But granted, I thought Gibbo did significantly better jobs on Bud when he was a Swan versus a Hawk, for whatever it's worth. But Gibbo also barely made mistakes by foot as well, and was part of that damaging crew down back throughout these successful times. So when we went to the trade table with North, surely they got something out of this deal in a significant way. Well, we gave them a second and a third, and we got a fourth back. So, on its merit, getting a key defender who was not good by any stretch, but as you can tell, definitely not worth a first-round selection, by the way. It was going to be key to make sure that North themselves, as they were going through a decent enough period, they made prelims in 2014 and 15 as well, that they could make do on those. We also got a 4th-round pick back from them, which ended up being pick 69. Nice. And the 2 picks that we ended up giving up were pick 25 and 41. And fun fact for you before we get to what North Melbourne did with those selections, that pick 69 ended up being Taylor Duryea, which is already genuinely ridiculous. And of course, no one will forget, hopefully, what Doc did throughout the 2015 preliminary final. Not only the sealing goal, you might say, even though the Tom Sheridan, Cyril Rioli moment is probably the highlight of that game, and I still think the Luke Bruce shimmy on, I think, Michael Johnson it was, or maybe even Lee Spur, was an absolutely masterclass moment. That sealing goal by Duryea was elite. But North Melbourne took Aaron Black and Aiden Kennedy. Now, granted, and I don't mean this to be disrespectful, I don't remember Aiden at all, and Aaron Black never really unlocked major potential as a Roo or a Cat. So we got a 2-time best and fairest winner. We then with a pick in the late 60s, ended up getting a guy who would contribute 2 premierships for 2 guys that at no point throughout their careers would be considered. That, my friends, is called a fleecing. We then go to Ben McEvoy, ended up being a captain of the club, as we know. And Macca was one of those really interesting ruckmen because in an era where you had early Grundy Gawn, you had Natanui, Sandilands, you still had Goldstein, who was around at that time, Sam Jacobs for Adelaide was a more than serviceable and absolutely unreal ruckman in his day, amongst a smattering of others. McEvoy was one of those guys who just didn't really lose. It wasn't a fact that he dominated a lot of games, and granted, he did have games where he was absolutely the better ruckman on the ground. I'm not denying that for a moment. But there are not really any games, especially of significance, where McEvoy lost. And that became key. The Hawks had the pieces around him, and he also, much like another guy we're going to talk about on this list, another deal with North, by the way, as a ruckman, he was able to take big contested marks both behind the ball and ahead of the ball, and convert his set shots. And of course, I can't talk about Ben McEvoy without taking you very quickly to my Year 10 English classroom with very good friend of the show, Smithy. Now, you guys haven't seen Smithy on camera for a while. Well, not with this channel and not with Daz Talks Footy for a while, which is a shame. But Smithy and I basically did the entire Year 10 English talking about footy. And when we heard, I should say, that the Hawks were interested in a ruckman, the 2 names that were brought up were Ben McEvoy and Billy Longer from Brisbane, if you don't remember Billy, who was also a Saint later on in his career. And all I'm going to say is that if we, at 15 and 16 years old, were in charge of Hawthorn's list management, we would have made the epically wrong decision. Now, granted, I think you're right, whereas Smithy was adamant that it would be Billy Longer. He's going to hate that I brought that up, but it's always fun to talk about the misses because we always talk about the ones we get right. But when you trade a first-round pick and a player for a ruckman, they better be good, and McEvoy was. Even if we gave up a champion or even 2, no one can argue with the results that the Hawks brought out. Now, granted, we got this deal done at the end of 2013, so our first-round pick was going to be pick 18 because we won the flag. It is also the reason that we got pick 19 for Bud as free agency compensation because that's how Band 1 works, as silly as it is or not. But I've also made enough videos on the fact that the Silvani, Draper, and these guys, their agency compensation or their free agency compensation was not actually the same band as Bud. It only ended up being that because we lost him when we won the flag, not when we were bad. But enough about that for another time. Now, most of us will probably remember that the player that we gave up was Shane Savage, who was a more than handy back pocket player. He was fine for the Saints. We were pretty stacked in the back pocket position. It actually kind of reminds me, maybe more of like a Timu version, if you will, of Seamus Mitchell. I don't think Seamus Mitchell would have got delisted from a worse club, and granted, he didn't get picked up in the delisted free agency market, so maybe there are some reasons for that, I understand. But I just thought he was a guy who unluckily didn't get a lot of games, mainly because we were pretty stacked down there. He still showed a lot of promise. Now, granted, Savage was a better player than Seamus Mitchell was, but position for position in the fact that they were not really needed anymore because of such a stacked defensive line, that's kind of the reasoning I was going for there. But what did the Saints do with that pick 18, I hear you ask? They drafted Luke Gunston, who, again, was fine, as in there was nothing really special about Gunston's career, especially, again, as you compare it with McEvoy. We are 2 for 2, not only A pluses, but a lack of hurt that the Hawks have been getting from these trades. Now, again, whether you guys had been drafted in a significant way, if they had have drafted a superstar, you would call the trades even. But if you're at this point in the video, you're probably thinking to yourself, no wonder we thought we could get unders for merit because everyone's just been taking our bad deals. Well, it doesn't end there. Now, Hawthorn traded a good player, albeit depth at this point, a top 10 pick, and got a 4th for Shaun Burgoyne, whose knees at that point in time were a genuine disaster if you believed the medical reports at the time. And granted, luckily for Port Adelaide, Shaun did not have a great career at the Hawks. Now, granted, that only becomes true in a parallel universe because what actually happened was Silk proved that he was the best utility in the league for an absolute decade, and whether it was the 2012 prelim final against the Crows where he won key center clearances, and also you could argue that he did that in some other big games as well, that 2018 game against the Bombers where he won a couple of key center clearances as well, and he was really good in the final home and away game of 2012 against the Swans. But of course, his absolute crowning game was probably the 2013 prelim against Geelong with the beautiful Bruce McEvoy commentary of he doesn't miss, he's kicked 3. That's right, 3. And outside of Sam Mitchell, who was dominant that night as well, Burgoyne was unbelievable in that game, and something that I'd love to do for the channel would be watch-alongs of past games. The 2013 prelim would definitely be very high up on my list, mainly for the fanboying of Silk. Unbelievable foot skills, his acceleration came back, and the recovery that he was able to do with Andrew Russell and the rest of the recruitment staff, and the medical staff, I should say, was amazing. And Graham Wright just proved how much of a genius he was. But granted, the fact that this was a 3-way deal with Port Adelaide and Essendon, the Essendon stuff doesn't really matter all that much, even though the player we sent did go to the Bombers. That, of course, being Mark Williams, who was probably the unluckiest omission from my Team of the Century video, if you want to go check that out. And I'm very sorry to you, Willow, just that I completely forgot about you. I knew I'd forget about someone obvious. Willow was probably that guy. But we did give up a top 10 selection. Now, granted, we got a 4th round pick back that ended up being Ran Hooper, which just didn't really work out, which is fine. But a top 10 pick, that is massive. And if Port Adelaide got a star out of that deal, well, then you could look at it and go, well, at least we saved this. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. Port Adelaide drafted Andrew Moore. Mark Williams didn't really get off the ground at Essendon. And of course, Hooper wasn't that great for the Hawks, but it's still another A-plus deal because you do that deal again 10 times out of 10 as a Hawthorn fan. And for some reason, part of the fleecing that we are able to expect from other clubs comes from the fact that we just do these deals, clubs accept them, and then shit the bed, which I think a lot of people were expecting the Bombers do in that moment. And as we get into, hopefully, some wars over guys like Zach Butters, Zach Bailey, Bailey Humphrey, these sort of guys, we are going to have to get used to paying a premium, which we didn't really do last time we won 3 flags in a row. So I don't really blame us. If you're used to paying a set price for something and you walk into the shops a year or so later and it turns out it's tripled, well, you're probably going to be upset about that, and rightly so. But that's 3 for 3 right now, and it doesn't end here. Brian Lake is the next man up, and remember how I said that we already got the best utilitarian in the league, a more than competent ruckman, and we got a 2-time best and fairest winner in premiership seasons? Well, what about just getting a Norm Smith medalist, again, that didn't cost us a whole lot? We traded a 2nd and a 3rd and got a 2nd round pick back. It ended up being pick 21 and 41, and we got 27 back for Lake, which is extraordinary. And yes, we did end up getting James Frawley, but that was through free agency. Of course, Melbourne ended up getting their band 1 compensation, but because they were bad, they ended up getting pick 3 out of the deal. And, but we got pick 19 for Bud. Yeah, sorry that we were really great the year that he left, guys. You're just going to have to live with it. Altogether, pick 27, which is what we got back from the Dogs, was unfortunately not used in a way that we were able to generate some more youth in the door. James Stewart didn't, end up becoming a star for the Hawks, which is unfortunate. But the Dogs surely got something good out of this, right? Well, sort of. They on-traded that pick 41 that ended up landing at the Saints, and they drafted Josh Saunders, so the Dogs get let off the hook for pick 41 there. Saunders didn't do a whole lot at the Saints throughout his career, but pick 21 could have really been something, and they drafted Nathan Rovat, who, let's be honest, again, was not a star. Played at the Dogs, played at the Roos, and was never really seen as anything more than a depth piece. Whereas, I want to reiterate this, we got a Norm Smith medal-winning defender. Key defender. Can anyone at some point make us pay for this? Maybe. I'm not sure who your favourite Hawk of all time is. I'd love for you to tell me in the comments, but mine is more and more Jack Gunston. Now, in terms of favourite for a variety of reasons, the accurate goal kicking, the fact that in terms of forwards, we'd seen the brilliant athleticism of Bud, the positional versatility that Ruff gave us, But Jack Gunston was the first sort of lead up forward in my teens that I saw that dominated, and I feel like I gravitated towards that the more obsessed that I got with footy as a teenager, and I was already a pretty damn big fanatic about it at that point in time anyway. And of course, I grew up, and a lot of these guys ended up leaving. Mitchell Hodge ended up moving on alongside Lewis, by the way, but Gunners was still here. Now, we've done 3 deals for Gunners. We got him for the Crows, sent him to Brisbane, got him back. I'm only focusing for the purposes of consistency in this video for the deal that got him from the Crows, even though the deal that got him back from Brisbane was unbelievably elite as well. I'm keeping this consistent throughout. The fact that a guy can have the number 19 jumper, Jason Dunstall's number, and I'm not saying he compares to Bunga in any way, shape, or form. The Chief, one of the GOATs, but the fact that he has that number and has made it his own for this generation can never go underrated, or at least I hope it doesn't. Now, I believe, rightly or wrongly, and at the time of recording, the Hawthorn jumper numbers have not come out yet, but I believe that when he retires, Cal Shadir is going to take that number for the bond that they've got and just to show the mentorship that has occurred between those 2 young men. Now, I could be absolutely wrong on that, but that's what I feel in my jimmies, if I can quote Detective Pikachu. But that deal that got him for the Crows, Victorian boy, had tips in his hair. Come on, Jack, you're better than that. But we ended up, again, not giving up a first-round pick, but we did give up a 2nd, 3rd, and a 4th, and we ended up getting a 3rd and 4th back. Now, effectively, what that looked like in numbers was pick 24, which ended up being on-traded, pick 46 and 64, and we ended up getting pick 53 and 71 back that ended up being on-traded to the Dockers. Now, pick 53, we ended up taking Alex Woodward, one of the hard luck ACL stories of the modern era. And that pick 71 that we got, that we on-traded to Freo, they ended up taking Cam Sutcliffe with that selection. Again, pretty handy at pick 71, I'm not going to lie to you, even though Sutcliffe was never a top liner. That at 71 is pretty good value, a tip of the cap to you, sir. But this is more about what happened with those other selections, considering we got a guy at the end of 2011 that nearly 15 years later is still playing. That's a tick. What they did with it was the pick that was on-traded ended up being Henry Shade. Adelaide took Nick Joyce and Cam Ellis-Yolman. Now, I remember Ellis-Yolman, I really do. He was, again, fine, a depth player. I don't remember Nick Joyce all that much, and Henry Shade, I remember playing a game or 2. But ultimately, this is yuck across the board for everyone. 5 trades, 5 deals, 5 absolute fleecings that did not come back to haunt us in any way, shape, or form. It's actually ridiculous. And last but not least, David Hale. And one of my unpopular opinions is that if there was a Hawk from that era that would thrive in today's game, yes, Buddy, Cyril, Ruff, you could argue Mitchell, Hodge, absolutely all of those things. The most underrated player that would still thrive would be David Hale. The goal-kicking second ruck. The Hawks have done it with Marby or Chol this season. Every club would be fighting themselves over. And when it came to Hale, we were in a bidding war with Melbourne, who also wanted to acquire his services from the Kangaroos. Now, granted, I have not told my missus, who is a North Melbourne fan, that I was doing this video, and she doesn't watch my videos anyway, so thank God she won't hear about the fact that we absolutely bitched the Kangaroos twice in this, so that is A-okay. I am staying out of the doghouse, if you will, or the Roo house, if you want to go with the shitty pun. But we ended up giving them our compensation pick that we got for Campbell Brown leaving. We also ended up giving up a late 4th round pick, and they ended up giving us a late 3rd, which we then on-traded, and I am going to include what the hell we did with that on-trade with Melbourne because it's genuinely ridiculous. But it ended up basically being pick 27 and 71, and we ended up getting back pick 52. Now, let's start with what we did with that pick 52. We went to Melbourne, who we beat with the David Hale bid, I suppose, and we went, let's do a deal. Here's pick 52. We ended up getting a later pick and a player, that player being Kyle Chaney, who didn't end up playing in any premierships for us, but was serviceable enough in the games that he played. What did we do with the pick we got back from the Ds? We took South Australian Paul Puopolo. Yeah, I'm serious. Not only did we get David Hale in this deal, but a byproduct of this deal was getting another triple premiership player out of the bargain. Now, granted, I am going to give Melbourne credit here. They are the only club that you can go, they had a big win out of this. Yes, they didn't get David Hale, and that sucks. But with pick 52, they took Tom McDonald, who I think at this point, outside of what we did, has been the best player mentioned that another club has taken so far. He's got Sutcliffe covered, Ellis Yeoman covered, Andrew Moore covered. He's got those covered. So credit to you, Melbourne. You come out of this not looking silly. But 27 and 71. Now, you don't expect 71 to be a superstar. I know Freo took Cam Sutcliffe a little bit earlier in the video. That ended up being Ben Maben. That didn't particularly work out. But with that compensation selection, North Melbourne took Kieran Harper, which, if you don't remember, Kieran used to wear number 23 for the Kangaroos. And let's just go with, was never a top liner in this competition. Let's just say that. He was a part of some good North Melbourne teams, granted, but overall, we are now 6 for 6 in genuine fleecings. And not only do they look like fleeces on paper in hindsight, but when you take it to that level 3, we got no damage out of this at all. Graham Wright, you are my damn freaking hero. And on top of the players we brought in, we also landed Taylor Dorea and Paul Puopolo. But instead of taking it from all of the micros, let's zoom out and take a look at the level 2 and level 3 from a macro to fully explain how well we did and why we've all got the ability and the right to be a little bit entitled when it comes to the trade period. So effectively, we gave up Mark Williams, Shane Savage, pick 9, 18, 21, 24, 25, 27, 41 twice in 2 different drafts, obviously, 46, 64, and 71. That's what we gave up, which translating into the players, Mark Williams, Shane Savage, Andrew Moore, Luke Gunston, Nathan Rovat, Henry Shade, Aaron Black, Kieran Harper, Aiden Kennedy, Josh Saunders, Nick Joyce, Cam Ellis Yeoman, and Cam Sutcliffe, and we ended up receiving Josh Gibson, Ben McEvoy, Shaun Burgoyne, Brian Lake, Jack Gunston, David Hale, James Stewart, Kyle Chaney, Paul Puopolo, and Taylor Dorea. Why anyone would do a trade with us, I have no idea. And even if you look at the current guys now, the Jack Ginnivan trade in hindsight with the Pies would stand amongst some of these in my opinion. But that is a story for a different video. So outside of the fact that the Hawks had priority picks, we drafted unbelievably well, both with top-end selections and with nuggets later on. We got Cyril with pick 12 for crying out loud. We took Max Bailey, whose knee was only right for about 16 games, and he won a flag. We did everything right. We were the first team to attack the free agency period with giving up a lot of selections, and it went gangbusters for us, and we weren't made to pay for it at all. And to me, that's bloody remarkable. So that's it. That's the video. Thank you so much for watching. Go the Hawks. See you in the next one.